let's answer the question, how do I know if I'm ready to buy a home? Hey, it's Kristi. Thank you so much for being with me for another episode. I want to tackle the question, how do I know if I'm ready to buy a home? So it's not just the process of buying a home, right? I think the deeper question is, am I ready to be a home owner? There's a tremendous amount of responsibility that comes into that, and there are pros and cons to owning a home. So a couple of questions that I want you to ponder before we get into the pros and cons. So this will have a really big impact on your answer. So first and foremost, do you have income and is it stable? If you jump around jobs, if you haven't really figured out what you want to do with your life, or even if you're going to stay situated in the community in which you live in, home ownership may not be the right thing for you right now in your life. It may be needing to be postponed until a different chapter in your life. I've seen some people jump the gun a little bit too early and they just weren't quite ready for it. And a year into home ownership, they had to sell and move, and there's costs involved with selling your home and with moving that isn't necessarily involved if you are just getting out of a rental home. So do you have income and is it stable? Next, do you have credit established? If you're brand new into establishing your credit, you may not have the credit history that lenders want to see for home ownership, but you may not be at that place in your life that you've proven to yourself the ability to borrow money and pay it back, borrow money and pay it back. So if you're currently living with your parents and you don't know the costs involved of having your own home, I'm saying even just a rental, it might be a really good idea to start there. It gives you an opportunity to figure out how much of your income is going to your housing. So it's not just the mortgage payment or the rent. Even if you're renting, you still have your utilities, so your electric bill, water bill, Wi-Fi. There's other things too. You might be responsible for your own pest control, lawn maintenance, those kinds of things. So I think it's a really good idea to rent first and make sure that you are in it and you have a really good understanding of those costs of carrying your own home. Next is, do you have a down payment saved? There are a couple of 100% financing loans out there. I really think though, if you have some of your own skin in the game, it means more to you. But most conventional mortgages start with 3% down payment. And then there's also closing costs, which is the other side of your cash to close. Now, a lot of times you can ask the seller to pay towards your closing costs, but keep in mind the seller has their own closing costs and their costs are actually more than your buyer closing costs. So sometimes sellers aren't really excited about paying your closing costs when they have their own. So do you have a down payment saved up? And then lastly, do you intend on staying around and local and in a home for at least 3 years? In many cases, there's an equation that can be done to find out where you break even, right? So the closing costs that I spoke of, the cost of moving, those kinds of things. But if you're going to sell prior to 3 years, you may not have enough equity. If you put down the minimum down payment, which is 3%, you may not have enough equity to get out of that house without losing money. So let me dive in a little bit more. When you go to sell your home, you hire a professional, a realtor. And traditionally speaking, a realtor has a commission of 6%. And the listing agent splits it with the buyer's agent if the listing agent doesn't procure their own buyer. But typically speaking, it's about 6% in commissions. And then you have some additional closing fees that might equal another 1 to 1.5% of your sales price. So if you just bought the home in the last couple of years, you only put 3% down, there's a good likelihood if you sell it before 3 years, you may not break even. So knowing that you're going to stay in that home for at least 3 years would be my last question that I would have you ask or answer yourself to know if you are ready. So now let's dive into the pros and cons of renting versus home buying. So when you rent a home, the maintenance is typically taken care of by the owner, the landlord, or the property manager. So if the refrigerator breaks, if there's a leak, if the roof needs to be replaced, all of those things are the responsibility of the owner or the manager of that property. So the nice thing about renting a home is if something goes wrong, you call somebody, it gets fixed for you, and it's typically no money out of your pocket unless you're the one that broke something, right? So the maintenance fees are paid for by somebody else. Also, you'll never have to replace a roof, paint the exterior of the home, replace the air conditioning unit, upgrade the electrical, any of those things. Those can be costly over time as the owner of the home. And if you're renting, you don't have to take on any of that. And as the tenant, you're not responsible for property taxes, homeowners insurance, HOA dues, if that's out there, those kinds of things. You might just be responsible for your renter's insurance and doing a good job of maintaining that home. So those are the pros of renting. Let's talk about the cons of renting. So potentially your largest cash outflow is likely your housing payment. And if that's the case for you, if you're renting, you're not really the one that gets to say what your rent might go to when your term renews. So I know some people who bounce from rental to rental to rental because in that second year, the landlord wants to increase the rent by $200, $300, $400 a month, which is insane to me. You've got somebody who's taking really good care of your property and they're paying their rent on time. Just let's not have it go insane. But unfortunately, I see that quite often. So we've got to consider the cost of moving. If you move every single year, there's an impact in that, right? There's costs of moving, not just the rental truck and those kinds of things. But a lot of times we go out and spend a lot of money on new stuff for that bathroom, for that living room configuration, for the back porch that you didn't have before. And now you can go put some fun stuff out there. Sometimes you have to paint, clean, utility companies. I've seen utility companies charge enormous amounts of deposits if you haven't had an account with them before for that first year. Even if you have perfect credit, I've seen some of the big electric companies ask for a $250 to $500 deposit. So all of those things add up. Then you've got your first, last security. If you have pets, you have pet deposits. You might pay a higher rent because you have pets. All of those kinds of things are outside of your control. It's dictated for you. Okay, so let's swing over to the pros and cons of home ownership. There are tons of pros of home ownership if it's the right time for you to be a homeowner. So you are building equity every time you make your mortgage payment. Your mortgage payment is made up of principal and interest, which is repaying that mortgage, taxes, insurance, and maybe mortgage insurance if you didn't put 20% down. I've got another video that talks all about mortgage insurance if you're curious as to what that looks like. But you've got your total payment over here, and that's going to take care of your taxes and insurance as they come due every single year, and then also paying down that loan. So a portion of your payment goes to principal reduction. The other part goes towards interest, which is the cost of borrowing money. So every time you make a mortgage payment, your balance owed decreases a little bit, and that means your equity grows. So what does that mean? Equity is the difference between what something is valued and what you owe against it. So as you're decreasing that loan balance, your equity is growing in your home. And eventually you can live with no mortgage payment, free and clear. And the only thing that you're responsible for as far as your housing is taxes and insurance. And what a beautiful place to be. Could you imagine what you could do with all of that extra money? I can't even stand it. So if you've got to make a housing payment anyway, you should be the one that dictates what that monthly cost is. And you get to dictate that based on the size and price of the home. So make sure you fall in love with the payment before you fall in love with the home. So if it's your largest cash outflow, make sure also that your housing payment is no more than about 33% of your take-home income. It's a really safe, really comfortable and conservative place to be for your housing costs, because there's other things that you've got to take into account, such as maintenance, right? So you have repairs and maintenance, and then you have upgrades and renovations. So the upgrades and renovations is where, you've painted the walls, you replace the appliances, you put in sexy countertops, You've made your home look like yours. Maybe you put some landscape and landscape lighting in. Maybe you've painted the exterior of your home. Those kinds of things are typically upgrades and renovations to make it yours and to make it something you really, really love. But what about the upkeep? So, over time, roofs have to be replaced and air conditioning units have to be replaced. Hot water heaters go. The great news is that most of the items inside of a home will last you for years and years. It's not like it has to be replaced every couple of years. We just bought our home a couple of years ago, and our water heater was 19 years old. So while we were doing some upgrades and renovations, we had a plumber here that was helping us redo the configuration of the bathroom. They were moving around where the plumbing was going so we could have the sink on a different wall than where it was originally. And while he was here, we had him go ahead and just change out that hot water heater. So it was a $700 expense. It didn't break us, but if you don't have $700 assigned for for repairs and maintenance, it could be a very difficult thing to take on. So what I tell my first time home buyers is always have in a house fund, and call it house maintenance fund, at least 1% of the value of your home. So if you bought a $250,000 house, always have $2,500 sitting over there for any kind of repairs or maintenance. Outside of replacing a roof or replacing an air conditioning unit, it will replace most everything else. If your washing machine breaks, if your refrigerator bites it, if your hot water heater is now 19 years old and you need to replace it, it should cover all of those things. Even roof repairs and air conditioning repairs should be handled in that $2,500. But eventually, you'll know it. If you have a 20-year-old air conditioning unit, you'll know that it is something that you need to start putting some additional funds to replace it. The good news about something like that, if it's 20 years old, is probably costing you more in electric bills than what you want to have anyway, because it's not an energy efficient unit. So when you do replace it, you might be able to get an energy efficient unit, or maybe set up zones if you have a bigger house, and then that will save you some money in your electric bill every month, which over time will help reimburse you for that cost of buying a new AC unit. But when you're the homeowner, you're the landlord, you're the one that is responsible for the maintenance and the repairs. Speaking of being the landlord, when you're the homeowner, you can rent out a room if you wanted to. When I bought my first home, a friend of mine had just broken up with her fiance and needed a place to crash for a couple of months until she figured out her next steps. And you guys, she wound up living with me for 2.5 years. She paid half of my mortgage payment. And at that point, I was able to have substantial savings, which I wouldn't have been able to have before, because she was paying me $6,000 a year for her housing to stay with me. I was able to pay off my student loans and pay down most of my auto loan faster, like double time. It was pretty awesome to be able to get out of debt doing that. So consider that if you have a friend that is clean and quiet and you know that you can get along with, or somebody who just travels a lot. Where I live in our area, we've got a lot of people that work for airports, right? So flight attendants and those kinds of things in the travel industry. If you've got somebody who travels all the time, all they really need is a room to hang out with until they come home from long trips, those kinds of things. So maybe you could find somebody who travels a lot for work or something along those lines and just needs a bed to crash in, and they're happy to be a quiet and respectful roommate. Some pros to home ownership is that the values typically increase over time. So owning real estate is a long-term game, you guys. So over time, it appreciates in value. So the goal is that if you were to sell it, say 3 to 5 years later, you've walked away with a nice big chunk of change. A friend of mine bought her first place for less than $100,000. It was this cute little townhouse, and she bought it 4 years ago. She's a school teacher, and so, she doesn't get paid what she deserves to get paid. So when she went to go buy her next home, she moved to a different town. She sold this home and was able to buy her next home, you guys, after 4 years of home ownership for a home that cost her less than $100,000. She walked away after all costs, real estate commissions, everything, with $62,000 in her pocket. So we were able to position her really, really well. She put down 20% on her next home purchase. She had money to pay off some other debts, and then she has this nice, beautiful cash cushion in her savings account. And it was all tax-free, federal tax-free, if you've owned your primary residence for at least 2 years. So think about that for a minute. Really, really big bonuses and benefits to homeownership when you go to sell and it has an appreciated value. So let's talk about those cons. You're the one that's responsible for all of those maintenance. So there are costs involved, as I had mentioned before. So when things break or need to be replaced, it's on you. Now, there are some home warranty options that you can purchase. So usually somewhere between $500 and $650 a year that covers some of the major components inside of your home. So the air conditioner, appliances, those kinds of things. So look into home warranty options as something that you consider if you're going to be considering buying your first home and you're scared about some of those more expensive costs of home ownership. Another con to home ownership is that taxes and insurance do increase over time. I do believe that's one of the reasons why rents have increased so much, is because the owner of that home passes it along to the tenant. But in this case, if you're the homeowner and taxes and insurance increase over time, that's on you. So that makes your payment go up over time. Now, it shouldn't be something that's like, it just doubled overnight, or this year you're paying, $1,000 more than where you were last year. There is a caveat to that one. If you bought a brand new construction home, a lot of times the taxes in your original mortgage payment start off just based off of the land value. And if that's the case, you're in for a really big surprise and not a good one when your taxes go up by thousands of dollars and has to be reconfigured in your payment, because they have to have enough in that escrow account to pay that on your behalf every year. So if you're only paying the land value portion, but now all of a sudden it went boop up like this in that first full year of ownership, it won't change drastically moving forward after that, but that is the caveat to a really big jump. Outside of that, I think just the regular cost of living, if you can consider somewhere between 3 and 5% increase year over year, I think that would be a pretty safe place to be as far as what you consider your future housing payments to be. And then the last really big con is if you don't pay for it, you lose it. When you sign a mortgage agreeing to paying back those terms, you are saying that you are going to put your home as collateral against that loan. So that means that if you don't make those mortgage payments, that you could be foreclosed upon. It has detrimental effects on your credit. It has some really bad effects on your self-confidence. So if you are thinking that maybe you're in an industry or a job that doesn't have consistency, then maybe this isn't the time for you to buy a home. You want to do it where you're a little bit more established in your life. You've started in the profession or your career. You've got some time under your belt. Maybe you're in a relationship and then you're pulling together a new family. I know a lot of single people who buy the home that we're in right now is actually the first home that I've owned with somebody. It was our first home that we bought together, but all of the other homes that I've owned before, I bought it as a single lady. So don't necessarily wait for a relationship to become a homeowner. There are plenty of places out there that are perfect for you in your life right now and might even be less every single month than what you're paying in rent right now. So I hope that I've done a good job showing you some pros and cons of both homeownership and renting. I do have an attachment that I'll put underneath this video that has a visual on pros and cons that I'd love for you to have, and hopefully it'll help you make decisions if this is a right time for you to be a homeowner. Thank you so much for being part of this with me. If you haven't already, subscribe to Credit Kristi. I also have a YouTube channel called Your Loan Superhero. So if you're thinking about buying a home, please check me out over there. I have dozens and dozens of very short videos. Most of those are 2 to 3 minutes long that answer a whole lot of questions that first-time home buyers are seeking. So I'd love to. Thanks for joining me for another episode. Until next time, stay well.